The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any other affiliate airing the show. Airing first on Asheville FM, this is The Final Straw, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting from occupied Cherokee land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from people engaged in the long project of liberation all around the world. I'm your host for today, William Goodenough. You can find full archives of The Final Straw, plus accompanying blog posts up at our website, thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org. And for 58-minute-long radio-clean versions of each episode, you can go to archive.org and search for The Final Straw Radio Collection. If you like, you can send us letters at P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. And if you use any of the audio we present for your own project, podcast, or radio show, just holler at us via email so we know.
On Tuesday, June 11, 2019, the day of solidarity with Marius Mason and other long-term anarchist prisoners, Firestorm and Blue Ridge ABC will be showing a couple of films and having a vegetarian potluck from 6 p.m. till 8 p.m. We invite you to come by, eat, share, watch, chat, and celebrate the fierceness of our comrades that the state fears so much that they have to stick them in cages. Also, if you're looking for more audio, check out our episode released on June 7th with an anarchist in Italy about hunger-striking prisoners Silvia and Anna at L'Aquila prison against the torturous solitary conditions there. Also, for June 11th, keep an ear out for a podcast special featuring Michael Kimball, Sean Swain, a song dedicated to Marius Mason, an anarchist supporter of Eric King, and Rob Catt, one of the editors of the journal Fire Ant, coming out in a few days. We interviewed all these folks about Fire Ant, prisoner support, and community. Both of these audios can be found on our website soon, if not now, at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org.
Today, I'm very pleased to present some audio from two Palestinian comrades, Iman Elohini, who is an Austrian-born Palestinian living in Vienna, and S, a prisoner rights advocate, about their work doing consciousness raising and advocacy. Because of time differences and schedules, we recorded our interview over text-to-voice prints about a month ago. So there will be some dated material in the interview, but I believe it is relevant even now. In this interview, we talk about their work and recent projects, the social media project On Palestine, which Iman co-runs, which you can find on Instagram and on Facebook, and issues such as how we talk about anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, and apartheid as it could relate to Palestinians. When we were first talking about doing this interview, there had just been a massive hunger strike of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails and prisons. It ended a couple of days before the interview took place, but the main demands of the strikers were the institution of landline phones in prison and releasing those held in solitary confinement, many of whom are children. Some other issues in Israeli prisons also come up in S's segments. The use of electronic signal jammers is one which has been a central problem for some time. The prison puts these in place, ostensibly to prevent the use of so-called contraband cell phones, even though prolonged exposure to these devices causes health problems from headaches to certain forms of cancer over the long run. It's my understanding that these jammers have not yet been removed from facilities, even though the hunger strikers were demanding they be removed. Another central issue that S brings up is the rationing of drinking water given to prisoners. The land in question is characterized by its long, hot, dry summers. It's common for prisoners all around the world to not have any form of indoor climate control, and if you're being held in a small room with many other people for long hours at a time, you could imagine why rationing water would turn into a huge issue.
Finally, at the end of this episode, we feature audio from BADNews of May of 2019, which is a monthly anarchist podcast from the A Radio Network featuring voices this time from the Balkans, Germany, and the UK. Stay tuned for the next episode coming out mid-June, or check out the archives available at a-radio-network.org.
But first up, we have some words from the Likhts'amisyu Summer Camp. We hear from two people involved in this project from the Likhts'amisyu clan about an autonomous camp and climate research center being constructed on Parrot Lake in Likhts'amisyu territory.
Well, my name is Spogelskam. My Canadian birth certificate name is Warner Nazal, and I'm the head chief of the Sun House from the Likhts'amisyu clan. And I got my name about 3 years ago from the elders and the other chiefs and the matriarchs from my clan. And they've instructed me when I took the name that my number one job was to work towards protecting our territories. So that was the marching orders I got from day one.
And my name is Adam Gagnon, and my respected chief name is Tahale. And I am be one of the coordinators there for doing a lot of the construction that's going to be taking place there out on the territory. And what we're going to do is we're going to be basically constructing a community out there. And it's going to be situated at a place called Parrot Lake on Likhts'amisyu territory. And I think we're going to end up with quite a few of our clan members working out with us, as well as supporters from all over the place there that are really eager, to join the medicine show and come along and help us construct the community. What we've decided there was that Unistoten has created a treatment center out on their territory, and they're doing really well with all of that. And what the Likhts'amisyu have decided to do is work towards doing climate research out on a territory for the greenhouse gas emissions and everything else that's in the atmosphere, as well as looking after all of our watersheds. So we're looking at doing enough construction to get all the preliminary work there for the Climate Research Center that we're going to be working towards in the next few years. So this year, we just want to make sure that, we have some cabins built, and we have a kitchen and kind of a mess hall, to make sure that everybody's going to be looked after and fed. And then we'll start working towards our Climate Research Center right after we get all of the initial infrastructure in place. We want to be able to nurture the land and bring it back, because right now we've had, logging throughout our territory there since the 60s and 50s and 60s, and they've basically taken all of the saleable timber off of our territory. So all we're left with is kind of like a moonscape out there, with seedlings. The whole monoforestry mentality there, just to try to get quicker growth. And we have to scare away from that and start looking at nurturing our land and bringing the ecosystem, to the point where it's more sustainable. So these are things that we're kind of focused on right now as Likhts'amisyu. That's going to be a really crucial part of it there, is to have volunteers out there, because I imagine a lot of them are not going to want to be working out there the full term. They'll be kind of like the Unistoten, they'll be coming and going. So I think in that regard there, the more volunteers we get, the better.
So we do have a cabin kit that we're going to be bringing out, but we also have building material for the foundation and the roofing, as well as we need to do some fundraising to get all the finishing stuff in for the cabins and other buildings that we're going to be having up there. And all the funds that we're going to be raising are going to go straight towards the materials and the supplies that we need. So we're going to be needing to transport stuff around. We've got some heavy equipment that's going to be coming out, so we need fuel to move that stuff around. And all we're looking for is just the fuel and the upkeep of those pieces of equipment that we'll be using.
Each clan is basically autonomous of the other. So what happens is the Likhts'amisyu are moving in a certain direction, and the other clans will take different aspects of what's really important to them, and they'll run with that. But the Likhts'amisyu want to just concentrate, on the whole climate action, and that's the direction that we're going to be focusing all of our attention on for the next several years. So, and that's mainly because, like I said, we're initiating, our whole legal strategy is based on, the climate action, and we're going to be working with many different scientists there that are going to be helping us try to work at once we get the community set up and established, putting together, all of the expertise there for the climate research center that we want to build out on a territory. So there's going to be several phases that take place. The first year, is to make sure that we have, housing to accommodate the people that are going to be working with us, as well as making sure that, we have a kitchen and a mess hall and everything that's going to make it as comfortable as possible, because we're going to build this community right beside a major lake, and we'll be able to have our canoes, and we'll be building wharfs and doing all kinds of things simultaneously. So we want to make it not grueling. We want to make it fun, so people will want to be out there.
There's medicines all over that are all around the lake. It's one of the few places in Wet'suwet'en territory where toxic industry hasn't moved in and destroyed the water systems. So the water system in that lake is intact. The biodiversity is really strong. You asked the question about climate change and why we're focusing on that. Last year in Wet'suwet'en territory, huge, massive forest fires swept through our territories. There were 3 of them that converged into one massive fire, and that was just south of where we want to build this camp. And this year, listening to all the reports from the environmental community, the snowpack that we experienced throughout the winter is less than it was last year, which means that if we don't get enough rain this summer, we're going to experience a more severe fire season than we saw last year.
Well, the RCMP right now have a full detachment up on 26, and what they're basically doing is harassing, all of the supporters to Unist'ot'en and the Gidimt'en. It's just basically harassment, and they're trying to take their vehicles off the road for just the most minor infraction, just to try to deter all the First Nations from being on their land. So what ends up happening is the RCMP are basically acting as private mercenaries there for big oil, because they have no reason to be out there. There's nobody in any danger out there, but they're strictly there just to look after the interest of big oil. They're not there for the people at all. They're harassing the people. So that's the problem that we're faced with the RCMP. And we like to, we have to look at, different logistics in regards to how we could deal with them, because, this can't go on. They can't, don't deny us access to our own territory. So these are, it's an ongoing problem, and we have to figure out a remedy for it.
With Jason Kenney being elected in Alberta, there's going to be a big push to try and get the Kinder Morgan pipeline through. And when that expansion push starts to happen, we expect the push to also occur with the LNG pipelines that they want to shove through to Kitimat, past our territories. So our people have said no to all pipelines. We've said it since the beginning of the pipeline talks. The chiefs and the elders, many who have gone already, have spoken passionately about it, saying that we have to do what we can to stop it. So that's what we're doing. We inherited this responsibility to fight for our territories and protect it from any types of pipeline development. And that was under the order of a lot of the people who were a part of this process for a long time.
To keep up with this project, you can visit Likhts'amisyu.com, email them at likhts'amisyu@gmail.com for more information, and that's LIKHTSAMISYU. You can also visit our show notes for links to all that, to the registration form for the summer camp, and also to the video that this audio was pulled from, with permission from the participants. Now on to the interview with Iman and S about solidarity with Palestinian prisoners and many other topics. First of all, thank you so much for coming onto the show. If desired, would you introduce yourself for the listening audience?
Hi, thank you for having me today. I'm Iman Al-Ghanemi, an Austrian-born Palestinian living in Vienna. I'm active in social media. I co-run an Instagram page, for example, called On Palestine, which can also be found on Facebook. And we share daily updates on Palestine from the inside and generally any international news concerning Palestinians. And we aim to keep people updated and informed about the situation for Palestinians and generally just spread awareness. And yeah, and I also occasionally write on a blog that I have.
Our organization were founded in Brussels and registered in Denmark by a group of academic and human rights workers in order to promote justice to Palestinian prisoners. We executive office are mainly based in Denmark. We established an interesting network in human rights defenders and the level of the European Union.
I'm interested in how people got into the kinds of projects, activism, or liberation strategies they participate in. Would you be willing to speak on this for yourself?
Well, there are many different reasons that lead people to activism. It could be one's own conditions or a shocking experience or discovery that acts as a sort of wake-up call and awakens this sense of needing to do something to support a specific cause. For me, it was different things that drove me to what I'm doing today. First of all, since I was a very young child, I've been a critical thinker, questioning everything around me, things that I perceived as injustice, and I've been constantly asking myself about the root of this injustice. And growing up as someone of a religious and ethnic minority background in the West, I had to live with the fact that I'll never be among the most privileged of social groups, especially after being exposed to the political campaigns and election campaigns of the local right-wing parties that were quite overwhelming to me at first. But if I'd compare myself to other Palestinians, for example, from other regions in the world, then I've noticed that I get to enjoy many privileges that they don't. And I'm speaking of those living under the occupation as second-class citizens, or in the West Bank, or under the Israeli blockade in Gaza, and those not only internally displaced, but also stateless refugees in neighboring countries. I could have ended up like them. And on the one hand, this has taught me to be grateful and appreciate what I have. But this has also awakened a sense of extreme guilt in me, and I constantly feel the need to do something about it, at least raise awareness in my social circle. And to me, true gratitude is making use of my privileges for the sake of the unprivileged, for those in need. And also when reflecting on historic events that led to the injustice we're witnessing, not only in Palestine, but in many regions in the world, like this gap between the so-called developing and developed countries, and the consequences and aftermath of colonialism that are still felt today and shape billions of people's lives. I mean, it just angers me, especially when countries that have played an evident role in ruining a specific country's economy and social and political structure in the course of colonizing it, distance themselves from the damage they've done. So it's important that we take a step back, reflect on what we have, and not only sympathize, but truly empathize with those who have less. And really putting yourself in the shoes of others isn't always easy, especially in a capitalist society, where it's often required that we subconsciously put empathy, our true humanity and morality aside in order to maintain ourselves.
In doing the work you do, have you learned anything that surprised you?
Yes, I've definitely learned and experienced things that I've not anticipated and have not expected to be in that great extent in the past few years. So, for example, last year I visited Beirut and went to a refugee camp called Burj al-Brajne, and it's the most overpopulated refugee camp in the city, and it started off as a Palestinian camp and has been accepting Syrian refugees in the past few years. And the conditions there are just horrific, worse than I've expected. So the first thing that you notice, other than the buildings that are in horrible conditions and look like they're about to collapse, is the sewage system that is very old. You know, cables are hanging everywhere, and the old cables cannot be told apart from the new ones, so they're left there unremoved. And this has led to many accidents, especially when it rains or when there are floods, which happens a lot, and the houses get overflooded as well. Yeah, this has caused many accidents, and just a few days before I came, I was told that a young boy has died from the sewage system, and they hung up his picture in the place where this accident occurred, and it just felt so near, and that was really heartbreaking. And also, the crime is such a large issue there. I mean, if you think about it, people there have such limited rights under the Lebanese government when it comes to education and work, and they live their whole lives in this ghetto-like restricted area, and people need to get their money from some source, and for many it is dealing with illegal drugs. And I was told that even young boys as young as 10 or 12 years deal with the most dangerous of drugs. Drug consumption is also a real issue there. But also fights occur a lot there between people. I mean, they're living under constant stress and pessimism, I guess, because they've been there for decades, some of them. Some are born there, and their parents have also been born into this camp. So, they're in this state of complete desperation. And it's also natural to hear gunshots every now and then during fights. And yeah, that was quite shocking to me, and it's a place that is unimaginable for most people in the West to live in. Yet the UN funds are being cut, and people are not given more rights, and the occupation is still ongoing, and people don't have the right to return. And another thing that has surprised me is the restrictions that activists and NGOs advocating for the rights of Palestinians are facing in Europe and in Austria specifically, where we have freedom of speech as an alleged democratic value, a central one. Yet the Zionist lobby is very strong, and activists are constantly silenced. And whenever NGOs or any groups standing up for Palestinians try to hold an event, there's always so much pressure on it, and the locations often end up cancelling the event, sometimes without an explanation or with some unclear excuse or accusations of anti-Semitism and dangerous ideology that's being propagated, etc. So do we really live in a free country with no censorship? That is a question to think about.
There were recently several Palestinian prisoners who were on hunger strike protesting conditions in Israeli prisons. What was the context there, and what is the situation of the strikers now?
The European entity to defend the Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli jails has been released according to the vision of European Palestinian Conference, with dealing with the justice of Palestinian cause and Palestinian people, and according to believe in the national principles and ethical and human duties toward the Palestinian prisoners in Israeli occupation prisons, which is against the international laws and far away from the European and international public opinion and viewpoint. Palestinians, old and young men or women, are being detained without proper accusation and without real cause. That has led to more than 6,000 Palestinian detainees, from which 350 are still considered underage, and 50 women, as well as 750 detainees who require a high medical care, and those who have been detained without cause, to nearly 450 people. And after the escalation of the situation to the Palestinian detainees in the Israeli detentions, there only one way to listen their voice to the heart is through their hunger strikes. Now about the hunger strikes. More than 400 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails ended their May's hunger strike on April the 15th, after the Israeli prison service agreed to fulfill their demands. The key demands of the prisoners were the installation of landline phones inside prisons and releasing those kept in solitary. Prison authorities also agreed to reverse the measures that they had introduced in February, including the installation of a mobile reception jamming devices. Prisoners had repeatedly complained of headaches because of these devices. A statement by the Prisoners Committee of the Islamic and National Factions Aid, the prisoners movement confirmed that they reached a deal with the Israeli prisons service, removing electronic jamming devices and all allowing them to have landlines in prison to call their families. The hunger strike called the began at the 5th of April, and the local media had stated that more than 1,500 prisoners, including administrative detainees, were to join the hunger strike if their demands were not met. And Israel currently holds 5,450 Palestinian prisoners, including 200 administrative detainees, as per the list figures from the Jerusalem-based Palestinian prisoners. The most of these prisons are being held in jail in Israel in a blatant contravention of Article 65 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which requires occupying power to hold prisoners from occupied land within their area, according to rights groups. More than 1,800 inmates are in urgent need of medical care, and close to 700 are suffering from serious and chronic illnesses.
Will you speak on conditions in Israeli prisons?
The striking prisoners pointed out that they had been asking for the installation of a payphones in the jails for a long time, similar to the ones in jails where Israeli prisoners are kept. They also raised concerns that the jammers may cause illnesses. Israel's Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan had earlier defended the jammers by claiming they were necessary to stop terror activities in prisons, without providing any evidence to back his claim. Erdogan had in January planned to make the living condition of Palestinian prisoners worse. His proposals included rationing water supplies, reducing the number of family visits, removing cooking rights, and revoking the prisoners' access to televisions. His plan, however, did not proceed as it would have required parliamentary approval first. The striking prisoners had also demanded that they be allowed visits from family members at least twice a month. Another demand of the prisoners was the lifting of all the new and all punitive measures that the Israeli jails authorities introduced against the Palestinian prisoners. Prisoners on protests and hunger strikes are subjected to harsh treatment from the jail authority, including being placed on solitary confinement, getting transferred from one prison to other, and even being forced fed. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health said in 2015 statement that under no circumstances will force feeding of prisoners and detainees in hunger strike comply with human rights standards.
This is the Final Straw radio show. I'm William Goodenough, your host for today, and we're talking about solidarity with Palestinian prisoners. The debate on anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is one which I think has the potential to spiral out of control very quickly. In the U.S., we can see this with all the debate about Representative Ilhan Omar. Will you talk about this in your cultural context, but perhaps would you begin by giving a working definition of Zionism?
So Zionism started off as a nationalist political ideology that advocated for the creation of a so-called Jewish state in historic Palestine, and now describes the support of the continued existence of Israel as we know it today, as the settler colonial state that it is. And the founder of this movement is Theodor Herzl, who's also from Vienna. And when he first presented the Zionist project towards the end of the 19th century, it was widely rejected in the Jewish community in Austria and Europe generally. It was rejected to the point that the first international conference held by the Zionist organization in the year 1897, I believe, had to take place in the Swiss city of Basel, far away from any possible interference with the Jewish mainstream. And the supporters only started to increase when anti-Semitism in Europe rose sharply, culminating in the Holocaust, of course. And one of the early Zionist goals was to claim as much of historic Palestine as possible through mass immigration and driving out the Palestinian population. And this has led to a lot of support from Western European governments, in particular after the strategic and beneficial location of the Zionist state being Palestine was agreed upon. And even though Jewish anti-Zionism is as old as the Zionist movement itself, Zionists are quick to accuse every anti-Zionist of being anti-Semitic. In the US, we've seen this with our Representative Ilhan Omar that you mentioned, as she started publicly pointing out Israel's racist policies and the murder of Palestinians. And anti-Semitism is a serious issue that we're facing today in Europe and the US, and some countries are witnessing a sharp rise in anti-Semitic attacks in the West. But instead of tackling the issue at its roots, anti-Zionism is being fought. So in France, for example, Macron has been suggesting to criminalize anti-Zionism in response to increasing anti-Semitic attacks in France. But Swain is opposing Israeli racism, a form or reasonable solution to another form of racism. In Austria, for example, we've had a long history of anti-Semitism with National Socialism that ended just over 7 decades ago. And the latest published annual police report claimed that 94% of the reported anti-Semitic attacks have been motivated by a right-wing ideology like white supremacy. But still, instead of tackling this deep-rooted European issue, our politicians are quick to shift the blame on migrants from the Middle East and on anti-Zionists especially. And last year in November, the University of Vienna, working together with the Israeli embassy, held a conference titled Confronting Anti-Semitism. And one of the main goals of the conference was to make anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism synonymous. And this is in no way a reasonable or efficient solution to anti-Semitism. In fact, Israel's supporters in the right wing, the political right wing, are multiplying, and being in favor of Zionism does not stop politicians from being anti-Semitic. We have, as an example, the nationalist Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who is known for his anti-Semitic statements, but also being in favor of Israel, and the British far-right ideologue Tommy Robinson, who's openly befriending Nazis and Holocaust deniers while also being in favor of the Israeli government. These are just some examples to name a few. So Zionism and anti-Semitism are not two completely inseparable things, and anti-Semitism should be fought at its roots and not instrumentalized for political support of Israel. And since when is it not permissible to criticize a country's policies in a democracy, why is Israel an exception, and why are those who do dare to criticize Israel consistently silenced? And in the end, we should not forget that Jewish anti-Zionists have existed ever since Zionism existed, and nowadays there are many Jewish or Israeli even NGOs propagating the rights of Palestinians and standing up for them, including Jewish Voice for Peace or Boycott from Within, to name a few.
I think there has been a lot of really interesting analysis coming out of places like South Africa, which has been talking about the Israeli state in terms of apartheid. Will you speak on this?
So first of all, what exactly is apartheid? Apartheid is generally defined as segregation and institutionalized discrimination, or according to the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid, it is defined as inhuman acts committed for the purpose of establishing and maintaining domination by one racial group of persons over any other racial group of persons and systematically oppressing them. So this can take many different forms, including the South African one that we've witnessed there, but it does not have to be exactly one-to-one the same form, as long as it applies to the given definition. And it does undeniably apply to Israel's policies for over 7 decades now, starting with the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians during the Nakba in 1948, during which over 750,000 Palestinians have been forced out of their homes. And it is the very basis the state of the Israeli occupation was established upon. And there are many characteristics of the Israeli regime that lead to this definition. So, for example, it is the only country in the world that grants someone a citizenship based on one's religion or inherited religious identity. I mean, not even Saudi Arabia or Iran would do that. And this is an evident form of segregation. One's own identity grants someone the right to a land more than someone else. And if we look at the state of the Palestinians at the moment, I mean, Palestinians are refused the right to return, and there is the systematic discrimination of Palestinian citizens in terms of land, housing, political expression, even simple cultural expression. And Palestinians in the West Bank also are discriminated against. There are Israeli settlements that have been built and still are being built between Palestinian cities, which are illegal by international law, by the way, and they're separated, or the Palestinian cities are separated by concrete walls and barbed wire, which is known as the segregation wall, that has been in construction since 2002 and stretches for over 700 kilometers. And this is a clear violation of international law, according to the International Court of Justice. And this segregation wall is up to twice as high as the Berlin Wall, and it cuts deep into Palestinian territory, which leads to the confiscation of large areas of fertile Palestinian land, the ghettoization of Palestinian towns and villages, and it separates people from their farmland, from schools and education facilities, but most importantly from hospitals as well, which has directly caused the deterioration to many Palestinians' health in need of immediate treatment. So in order to pass by checkpoints, Palestinians' papers need to be approved by Israeli soldiers, which can take up to several hours, and it can also get denied. And this is comparable to South Africa and the Group Areas Act that they had under the apartheid regime, where non-white people were forced to live in specialized areas, and families were consequently torn apart, and movements were restricted to the use of passbooks. And there's also a two-road system, with the roads built for settlers that are not accessible to Palestinians, and not to mention the ethnic cleansing that is still an ongoing issue in the West Bank. There is currently the Bedouin village of Khan al-Ahmar, that is being demolished and ethnically cleansed, and its residents are evicted in order to make room for further Israeli settlements that are, as I mentioned before, illegal under international law. And in East Jerusalem, the state or the situation is not much better for Palestinians. After annexing East Jerusalem in 1967, its residents have faced so much discrimination from the Israeli government, and still do today, And the goal is driving them out of the area to ensure a Jewish Israeli majority in Jerusalem. And after annexing it, in the same year, 1967, Israel held a census in the annexed area, and Palestinians that were absent at the time had no right to return, and the ones who were present received the status of a permanent resident in Israel, which is the same status that foreign nationals residing in Israel receive, even though the residents of East Jerusalem are indigenous to the area and have no other country they can return to at any time, unlike those foreign nationals. And this permanent residency carries a lesser status with fewer rights than those holding citizenship, especially when it comes to political rights and the right to vote in national elections, etc. And since this situation has its roots in pressuring Palestinians to leave, Palestinians can risk their permanent residency if they leave just temporarily, and this has affected hundreds of Palestinians so far. And a further issue that Palestinians in East Jerusalem face comes to housing, where there are many restrictions imposed, and this area is densely populated, and the population has multiplied over the past few decades, and with the time restrictions are becoming more impossible to bear. So for many Palestinians, the only solution is to build houses without permits. And this ends up to their houses being demolished or them being asked to self-destruct their own house. And in the past decade and a half, only hundreds of Palestinians' homes have been destroyed in East Jerusalem. And parallel to that, many Zionist settlers take up residence in the midst of Palestinian neighborhoods, driving Palestinians out of their homes again. And on top of that, we have Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, of course, who are suffering from discrimination on a completely different level, and this requires so much time to speak about, the whole Gaza blockade that has been going on for over a decade now. So, in short, Israel is not a state of all its citizens, and it is undeniably an apartheid regime, and if all of those actions of the Israeli government are not sufficient for someone to believe that it is an apartheid regime, then at least the nation-state law that was passed last year could be proof. I mean, it basically puts the apartheid system on paper, makes it official, and it is basically has the status of a constitution, but there is no real constitution because Israel has not clearly defined its borders, thus they cannot have a constitution. But yes, so this nation-state law clearly indicates that it's not a state of all citizens, and that some citizens are more equal than others. And those who object to such a comparison are either in favor of the oppressive system or just simply uninformed or misinformed about the Israeli regime. I mean, even Nelson Mandela, the anti-apartheid icon, explicitly said that, quote-unquote, our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. He stood up for the rights of Palestinians struggling under Israeli apartheid, as do many South Africans today, who know apartheid more than others, and many supporters of the non-violent BDS movement, or boycott, divestment and sanctions, supporting the Palestinian liberation struggle, come from South Africa, also because they, as South Africans, know that effective resistance to apartheid requires international solidarity. And at a session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva last year, the South African representative has described Israel as the only apartheid state in the world today.
There have been escalating far-right attacks on both Jewish and Muslim places of worship, one just the other day in California in the US, the shooter of which may have been informed by the horrifying attack in New Zealand in March. Will you speak on this and ways to fight far-right violence from your perspective?
So, as I already said, anti-Semitism is a deep-rooted issue in the West and a centuries-long one in Europe that has to be seriously tackled. Meanwhile, Islamophobia is also on the rise and has been becoming more protruding since 9/11. and Islamophobic tones can be spotted in far-right circles where anti-Semitism is also prevalent. So these two issues or forms of discrimination are in a sense intertwined and a result of the same rhetoric. And since you mentioned the Poway synagogue shooting in California, the person accused of carrying out the shooting is also accused of previously attempting to attack Muslims and has clearly shown admiration, so to say, for the Christchurch attack in March. So we need to fight both forms of racism that are both connected, A. And B, what I've noticed over the years is that whenever such attacks are addressed, politicians seem to limit the discussion to the perpetrator only, instead of addressing white supremacy and right-wing violence as a whole. And when speaking of hate speech and the dangerous sentiment towards ethnic or religious minorities in the political arena, it's not just Trump or this and that name that should be mentioned. He's just the tip of the iceberg. White supremacy did not become an issue threatening religious minorities overnight. And we need to inspect the entire rhetoric of the political right wing and hold them accountable. And in Europe, we currently have a debate on the extremely right-wing identitarian movement that was sparked off by the leader of the Austrian fraction of this movement, Martin Sellner, being offered a sum of money by the attacker who carried out the New Zealand shooting, Brenton Tarrant, and he accepted this sum of money, and now it's being debated whether this movement should be banned or whether Sellner should at least be held accountable or face consequences for the links to the Australian terrorist. But the issue with this debate is that it's only the movement itself that is being discussed. It's not the whole right-wing extremist groups or any groups propagating hate towards minorities and Muslims. But it's clear to me that it's simply not in the favor of our current government to properly tackle the issue at its roots. We have a coalition of two right-wing parties, being the Conservative People's Party and the Nationalist Freedom Party. And if they were to tackle the issue of white supremacy, then we'd have to inspect their own rhetoric. And especially the Freedom Party has had ties to the identitarian movement and to right-wing groups that have been attacking minorities. So if the situation stays like this, then we're not going to evolve in the right direction. And instead, political parties and figures need to be held accountable for hate speech, unproportional focus on discriminated minorities in their campaigns, and making use of the fear of a certain minority or the fear of the so-called great replacement for their own sake, because this is indirectly linked to violence, which can also be reduced through gun control, by the way, especially in the US, where regular shootings have become the norm. But even this is not enough of a solution, because guns and violence are just a medium used to express hate that has its roots in the rhetoric of white supremacist leaders.
How can people be in touch with the work you're doing? Are there ways to support?
You can keep up with the latest news on On Palestine that you can find on Instagram and Facebook. And if you're looking for platforms that accept donations, we always share the latest campaigns that do accept financial support or boycotting campaigns that you can participate in, as well as petitions that you can sign. And yeah, thank you for having us today and for giving us the chance to speak here.
Thanks for listening to our interview with Iman and S about solidarity with Palestinians and Palestinians incarcerated in Israeli prisons. You can keep up with what they are doing by following the handle Eye on Palestine on Instagram and following Eye on Palestine on Facebook.
This is the Final Straw Radio, and I'm Bursts. Next up, we'll hear two segments from comrades in the A Radio Network, from A Radio Berlin and Dissident Island, with international perspectives on anarchist struggle.
For this episode of Bad News, Anarchist Radio Berlin would like to share an audio from a comrade in Belgrade, Serbia, in which she talks to us about some anti-government protests which had started at the end of last year and continued on to this year, explaining to us a bit about the context of the protest from the point of view of an anarchist in the Balkans.
The protests that are currently going on in Serbia were started several months ago, mainly organized by opposition political parties. Also, a lot of citizens participated in them, and actually it looks like a bit chaos. Everyone trying to take over these protests. In one moment, it was maybe looking like they are self-organized by citizens, but then more and more it was evident that actually it's mainly organized by political parties that are in opposition. Also, the reason for the protests was the brutal attack on one leader of one opposition party, where he was really brutally attacked by some masked men in front of the place where they were supposed to have a presentation of their political party. So initially the protests were called Stop Blooded Shirts, Stop Blood on Shirts or something like that. In one moment also some leftist Marxist organizations tried to form a leftist bloc in these protests and to also try to put more into view this social question, social justice, but they got into conflict with these political parties, of which some also declare themselves leftist, even though they are not. Probably the worst thing about protests that are happening now is that so-called democratic parties, which used to be in charge after Milosevic regime, actually now signed this declaration and are collaborating with one political party which is very problematic. People would probably call them ultra-nationalists. People like me probably would call them klero-fascist. It's a political party called Veri. They have just few seats in the parliament. I think after last election, this was the first time they entered the parliament. They are really dangerous, and their leader is really dangerous because they are ultra-nationalist, cleric, and also they're also against abortion. They are against gay marriages, against LGBTQ in general. They are openly transphobic, openly homophobic, and everything else. So those so-called democratic parties, political parties from the past, some of them even calling themselves leftist, made actually the collaboration with these ultranationalist, klero-fascist people. And actually what I can see is happening, that the only one who will definitely benefit from everything that's happening is exactly this most problematic political party, which is already in parliament and now getting more and more in popularity. So very confusing, very stressful, very strange time.
So you just heard a short abstract from a conversation with a comrade in Belgrade, Serbia, talking about some anti-government protests headed by right-wing opposition parties. And yeah, if you want to hear a little bit more about what it's like for anarchists in the Balkans and in Serbia in particular, you can go to aradio.blogsport.de.
You're listening to the UK segment of Bad News, the UK being the so-called Kingdom of United England, and this is brought to you by Dissident Island Radio, a radical DIY radio collective pumping out twice monthly shows from London, the capital of capital. Starting from April 15th, the Extinction Rebellion, direct actions and road blockades were all over the news. Extinction Rebellion organised demonstrations in central areas of London, namely Oxford Circus, Marble Arch, Waterloo Bridge, and around Parliament Square. 5 activists, including XR co-founder Simon Bramwell, were arrested for criminal damage when they targeted Shell's headquarters near Waterloo. On the morning of 17th April, 2 activists climbed onto the roof of the Docklands Light Railway train at Canary Wharf Station, whilst another glued himself to the side, spreading disruption to railway services. The following day, the 3 activists were charged with obstructing trains and, after pleading not guilty, sent to jail for 4 weeks with no bail, but have since been released. On day 4, April 18th of the XR occupations, the arrest figure had risen to 428, the majority for breaching public order laws and obstructing a highway. By the end of day 5, the 19th of April, the arrest figure was up to 682 according to the Metropolitan Police statements. And on the 25th of April, 13 activists blockaded the London Stock Exchange and another 4 protesters staged an action at Canary Wharf again on public transportation. Canary Wharf is the location of most large multinational financial corporations, for those who don't know. A further 26 people were arrested, and by the end of the 11 days of demonstrations, 1,139 people had been arrested, and that figure includes the Met Police and the British Transport Police figures. There has been much critique across anarchist and libertarian left media outlets in regards to the Extinction Rebellion cooperation with the police in announcing its plans, its strategy of mass arrests, and in regard to the encouragement of protesters to be friendly with the police in social media posts, as well as issues in regards to the movement's handling of intersectional politics beyond environmentalism, issues of race and class, and issues of incorrect information when it comes to dealing with law enforcement and the criminal justice system. You can hear some of these critiques on Dissident Island Radio episode 232, as well as a critique on episode 233. On April 24th, Kurdish activists and friends occupied the London headquarters of Amnesty International to shed light on the Kurdish hunger strikes. Up to the time of recording, more than 7,000 people, mostly political prisoners, are jailed in Turkey and on indefinite hunger strike, demanding the PKK leader, Abdullah Öcalan, is allowed a right to visits by his family and his lawyers. Öcalan, who has been in prison since 1999, has been prevented from seeing his lawyers since 2011 and his family since a short visit back in 2016. He is detained in solitary confinement. Amnesty International's response was appalling to say the least. Hear about this in detail on episode 233. The Goldsmiths Anti-Racist Action student occupation of Deptford Hall on the Goldsmiths University campus continues. As of the time of recording, it has been going well over 50 days and is the longest occupation in the history of the university. It is also the first Black, Asian, minority ethnic, and Muslim-led occupation that we know of at any London institution. The Gara occupiers achieved one victory from their list of demands, that being to bring cleaning staff in-house and give them contracts with benefits such as sick pay and holiday. The Gara occupiers are demanding the remaining outsourced staff at Goldsmiths, namely the security contractors, be brought in-house as part of a wider demand to tackle racism on campus. Hear more on the occupation and their intersectional demands on episode 233 of Dissident Island Radio, and check out their social media feeds by searching for Goldsmiths Anti-Racist Action. Thanks for listening.